Let's go through a few examples of really well put together resumes. So overall, when I first look at this resume, the first thing that's going to stand out is, yes, it is one page. Yes, this person has used the full page, and it does have a fairly consistent formatting. It makes it a lot easier for me to look through it and see the different categories that are here and what's happening in each one of those. So the first thing I want to highlight here is the objective of this resume is taking up a decent amount of space. If you find yourself with limited space in your resume, you don't need to include an objective. Sometimes some applications will tell you specifically to reference a job number. That's a time when you want to use an objective to reference a specific job number. This is kind of like a shortened cover letter, just to be very clear of like, this is the position I'm applying for with this resume. Otherwise, you would probably put this kind of information in your cover letter. Ideally, you should have cover letters when you're applying to different positions. So you can always remove objectives, and that way you have more space in your resume for content highlighting who you are and what you've done. If you are a student, it's always good to put education first. And it's important to include your expected graduation date. Even if you haven't graduated already, you don't want to say like current, you want to make it clear when you're planning on graduating. If you have an excellent GPA like this student does, it is good to include it. Or if a specific job you're applying for requires a certain GPA level, then it's important to put that on your resume as well. Also, if you have any honors or any different minors that you're working on or any additional things related to your education, it's good to include that as well. This formatting for the project experience is very clear. It's helpful for them to see the title, the place, and the dates. The activities is a different format, so keep in mind when you have different kinds of formats, then when the HR manager or the person hiring you or anyone is looking at your resume, now they have to readjust to looking at something, a piece of information in multiple different ways. So the easier you make it for somebody to navigate through your resume, the more information that they can get from your resume quicker. Because keep in mind, a lot of times employers might just glance at a resume for 30 seconds or a minute and just quickly see what's on there, and then either put you in a pile of continuing to look at or don't look at any further. It's kind of intimidating to think about that, but it's also helpful in thinking, okay, how can I best communicate this? How can I put this in a format that makes it very easy for someone to quickly see all the main things that I want to highlight? So for instance, with the activities, there's a lot of incredible activities that this student has done, but somebody might not catch, just looking at this resume really quick, that this student's actually been a treasurer for SWE. And that's a huge position to hold because you're showing responsibility, ability to budget, a lot of different skill sets here. So a lot of times we'll minimize things that actually are really important for us to highlight because there's a lot of opportunity for highlighting more skills in those. And also, it shows some sense of progression. So there's been promotion or growth with a same organization. So it's always good to show that growth because then you can say, okay, first I was a member and then I decided to get more involved. And then I maybe held some other chair position. And then I was a treasurer or a secretary or a president, and any different position that shows leadership. And that progression towards leadership is really good. So it's always good to highlight those. And a lot of times students forget to highlight how much they've done with their different organizations on campus. So you'll notice this student has project experience. If you don't have work experience, it's very good to highlight project experience. Even if you do have work experience, it's a good idea to try to incorporate project experience in your resume as well. But project experience can help show your different skills like leadership, teaming, project management, time management, budgeting, creativity, all these different skill sets that you want to have, these transferable work skills, you should be highlighting in your different experiences that you have, such as project work, activities, volunteering. Resume, one of the first things I might be a little bit concerned about is maybe the student used a template, like a template on Word or somewhere to help them complete this resume, because here I'm seeing a lot of extra space that's not being used that could be used. So if we compare this to some of the other formats, we're losing out on a lot of opportunity to present different information. And I see that some of that was compensated by making the margins larger. So going all the way really far to the left and to the right to allow to have that more space. It's something to think about. This is, again, some of it's a personal preference of you want to show your way of organization, you want to show who you are, but be careful when you have too much white space or too much changes to a more traditional size of the page. So if we were to put education above the list of education, we could spread across that page a little bit more and maybe condense some of it. And especially when it comes to the work experience, um, a lot of these bullet points are very good. They're great starts, but there's a lot more here than what's being shown. And if we had this extra space, maybe we could make all these different bullet points under all the different experiences a little bit longer. And that's one thing I would also recommend is keep in mind when you're writing things on your bullet points for different work experiences or context, try to use up that whole line. And if you can't, that's okay, but also make sure you don't go on to the second line with only one word. If that's the case, just go through, do some editing, remove some words, change some words, keep it down on that one line. Or if you need two lines, then try to use those two lines to their full potential. Because again, we only have one page to showcase who we are and what we've done, and we really want to make sure to use that to the maximum benefit. This resume is from a student in computer engineering, so there's a lot more details about computer skills that you need to include when you have a background in computer science or computer engineering. So I think this is an excellent example of how you can include all these different computer skills and highlight what you're talking about. So programming languages versus Office software versus IDE software. Throughout your resume, you always want to be qualifying and quantifying things to really help emphasize and show evidence of the different things you're talking about. So for example, with these computer skills, when we say programming languages, we could say proficient in C and Java, comma, familiar with Arduino. And this might highlight that I have proficiency here and here I'm familiar with it, but I'm not as proficient. And then also it helps the employer know like, oh, this person's not just familiar with C, they know C really well. So again, if you want to highlight how qualified you are in each of your skills, that's a great idea because you don't want someone to see that and just assume you're familiar with something when really you're proficient, or vice versa. You don't want to take a job where someone's assumed you're excellent at Java, but really you're only familiar with it and you need a lot more practice in order to use Java at your job. I'm really happy to see the salon and the grocery store on here because far too often I hear students tell me they have no work experience because they haven't had an internship. But really, they've had a lot of other experiences working in stores or restaurants or various different places, and they think that's not relevant. It's extremely relevant. And it's especially relevant if you can help make it clear how it is relevant. So here I see one bullet point under the lemon squeeze salon. It says cleaned and maintained vital shop supplies. Yes, that's what you did, but what kind of transferable work skills did you get out of that? How can this transfer to the next position? So instead of just saying this, maybe I want to say a little more like ensured food safety regulations were met by cleaning and maintaining vital shop supplies. That will be something that helps a reader understand that I know how to meet different protocols. So maybe if I have to go work somewhere where we have to meet ISO standards or FAA regulations, they know that I am already familiar with different regulations in a different place and having to adhere to them and help make sure that my team adheres to them. So again, we can highlight something that you might think is not that big of a deal, but really it can transfer in an amazing way as long as you sit and think about it and ask yourself, how could this be relevant elsewhere? And another time with qualifying. So I see maintained and organized work environment. I'm kind of curious on a little bit of qualification of how. How did you do that? That's a hard thing to do. So how did you maintain an organized work environment? So I recommend teaming up with somebody else. Sit down, look at your resumes together, and go through each work experience and go through each of the bullet points line by line and ask, how did you do that? What did you have to do? And have a conversation. And as you're doing that, maybe try to take notes about what the other person is saying, highlighting what transferable work skills they had and what they were demonstrating in that. Because again, this is where we want to show our skills of leadership, communication, teaming, organizing, time management, all these different assets that you've acquired in different places. We want to highlight them here. So again, don't minimize your experience. There's a lot that you've done, and all you need to do is just slow down and think about, okay, how is this related? Or look at a list of skills that employers want or skills that you need for a specific job by looking at their job call and highlight those skills. And then look at the things you've done and try to see, okay, where's the connection? And then revise your bullet points to try to highlight that connection for the employer. The more you make that connection, the more the employer is going to look at your resume and think, oh, wow, this candidate is perfect for this job. So, one of the most difficult challenges with writing a resume and keeping it to one page is when you have a lot of different experiences that you want to share, it's really hard to keep it on that one page sometimes. And I think this is an excellent example of a student who's had a ton of different experiences. So, this is a great way of demonstrating how to get creative and getting everything in your resume. And it looks fantastic, but there are opportunities to also keep this in the same format if you wanted to, but you'd have to get a little bit creative in cutting some different things out. So looking at this resume, one of the things I would do first if I wanted to try to make this linear is I would look for opportunities to delete a line or remove a line to add more space. One of the first places I see is area of concentration and minor. This is a place I could add minor to the side, and that way I'm still including both pieces of information, but I don't have to take up an extra line. Also here, I see that I have a short 3 letters on the next line. So maybe I can do some edits on the line before to keep it on one line. Also, spacing is very important. So adding some spacing in between is a key thing to do in order to keep it easier to look at it because it might get overwhelming if it's just all words, words, words. So spacing is important, but sometimes you can make those spaces a little bit smaller and still maintain that need for some space to see the difference and highlight where things are. So sometimes you might be able to make the spaces a little smaller by making the font size a little bit smaller between paragraphs, which would buy you a line or two by the end of the whole page. And with this skills section, we could probably break this into 3 or 4 main categories. So programming languages, or we could even generalize it all the way up to computer skills, or we could do applications and languages in some way to group these. That way it only takes up 3 or 4 lines. And then that way we can do it all the way across consistent with the rest of the resume, how everything is written from left to right the whole way across. And then the awards, there might be some way to condense those. We could always put awards in 2 columns and have multiple awards in those 2 columns, but then we could still include all the awards and again, keep it that same 1 column format for the majority and then 2 column at the very end for the awards. So one other little note that I want to make here is education. Make sure that your degree is always first, always bold your degree, make it really easy and obvious for the employer to see what your degree is, because that's going to be the most important thing for an internship and jobs after college is to highlight that degree to make sure that they know, okay, you're in the field that we're looking for. One other thing I want to highlight here is we should avoid abbreviations as best we can in resumes, but this is an excellent example of listing the university the first time, putting it in as abbreviation, and then being able to just use the abbreviation for all the awards and everywhere else in here where it's saying that university name. This is another example of a great way to save space in a resume. So continuing this idea of being consistent, you'll notice here these action verbs headed, research, served are all past tense. And these ones, mentor, orchestrate, are all present tense. I know it's awkward to put things that are current in past tense, but it is a common practice in writing a resume that you want to keep all your action verbs past tense. So once we have the majority of our experiences written, or even all of them, it's a great idea to go through and look at all your action verbs. So saying, okay, I want to highlight each of these. What are the action verbs that I'm using and how did I use them? It's important to do that because sometimes it's natural to use the word collaborated or something else, and you want to keep using that action verb, but it's a good idea to try to think of, okay, what are other things that I can say? And maybe I do want to highlight teaming in every single bullet point, but is there another word I can use instead of collaborated so I don't just keep showcasing the same skill set? If you ever get stuck on action verbs, a good thing to know is you can always go online and just look up different action verbs. There's tons of different sheets with all these different action verbs for resumes specifically. So if you look one of those up, you can see a whole list of a ton of different verbs and what skills they highlight. And then it can help you get an idea of like, oh, I would have never thought of using the word spearheaded, but that kind of shows who I am. Like, I am a leader and I like to start new projects and initiate things, and I want to use that action verb. It's an excellent tool to help you brainstorm and think about different things that you want to, again, show in your resume. Here's another example of a resume that has the different categories on the left-hand side, experiences throughout the middle, and then the dates on the right. If we look at this one, though, we don't have as much white space here because of the way that it was formatted. There is some white space, but it is not as much as some of the others. But again, this is place where you're losing opportunity to showcase what you've done. And all of you have a ton of different experiences, a ton of different skill sets, a lot of things that you've done that you can show. So I personally recommend avoiding this kind of format because any kind of format that allows you to add more content over time might be more beneficial in the long run. If you can stick to this kind of format and again, minimize the white space that's being lost, then go for it. Again, this is somewhat of a personal preference of your organization, your way of communicating yourself. It does look really nice. It's easy to see the different categories that you're looking at. But again, you might be losing places to talk about things that you want to emphasize more. So here's an example where this student has a lot of different experiences and they're showcasing them some, but I know they can say a lot more about them because they've done a lot more than they've shown. And it's always a good idea to almost brag about yourself a little bit, but it's not really bragging. You're just highlighting how wonderful you are and all the things that you've done. You've done so much and you've worked so hard. Why minimize that in the one place in this tool that's going to help you get that job that you really want? This is where you want to take the time to say, no, like, this is what I've done. This is why I'm great. Like, look at, I've collaborated, I communicated, I led, I managed, all of this. And remember, anytime you can qualify or quantify what you've done, even better. For example, instead of just saying led my team, you might want to say led a team of 4 members. So you're quantifying. Or I might want to go even further and qualify by saying it was a cross-disciplinary team, because now I'm highlighting how many and also the type of team that it was. So it wasn't just software engineers, maybe it was software engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, all working together on a project, and I'm the one overseeing that. That's very different than just a team of all software engineers. So anytime you have an opportunity to highlight something that you've done that can be helpful to the employers, it's a good idea to do it. When someone looks at your resume, you want them to look at it and see the best of everything that you've done. And you want to highlight that. And sometimes it might feel conceited or it might feel uncomfortable to just talk about how great you are. But again, that's what the resume is all about. So don't be hesitant, because other people are going to be talking about how great they are and highlighting all their best assets, all their best experiences. And that's who you're going to be going up against for the job. So it's important that you show your best too. So showcase what you've done. Again, find any place you have an opportunity to qualify, quantify. I'm going to keep saying those again and again because it is